Hi, everyone. My name is Brindley Brooks, and I am the founder and CEO of HS Connect. And we are here today doing a special episode of the Healing Space podcast. And we have some wonderful guests here today, and I can't wait to get started. So let's dive in. We have Dr. Ginette Okoye, and she is a professor and chair of dermatology at Howard University and an international expert in HS care. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Okoye.
Happy to be here.
We also have Cara Nethery, program coordinator at HS Connect for Healing Space, HS patient, and she does all of our podcast recordings moving forward for HS Connect and for the Healing Space podcast. So there's a new season out, so pay attention for that. And then Kajal Bhika from the UCB medical team, who brings both patient-centered insight and data to us. So thank you for joining us as well. I appreciate it. And then today we're going to talk about silent struggles in dealing with HS, which is one of the reasons that the Healing Space program was launched and started. So let's just talk a little bit about that really quick and where kind of it originated from. I've been encouraging physicians to really have conversations with their patients above and beyond, how are you? Oh, I'm fine. But like really asking patients how they are. How is your mental health? How are things going for you? And Adam Friedman, who's our board president, said, okay, yes, I hear you, but what happens if patients aren't okay? Where do I send them for help? There are no resources that exist for patients who are struggling with their HS mental health wise. And instantly I was like, okay, you're right. So what HS Connect specializes in is agility and the ability to, within 2 weeks, we had a program, which is Healing Space, designed and talked to pharma about it. And UCB so graciously funded this because they know the importance of the mental health battle that we face as HS patients. So from 2 weeks of putting something together to actually watching it come to fruition has been absolutely incredible. And to see the growth that's happened within Healing Space, and the way that it has helped people find a sense of community and then find resources that are created to meet people wherever they are along their journey, and also bring in alternative types of therapies as well. Because we know that talk therapy is not for everybody. People need music therapy, movement therapy, exercises, breathing, anything and everything that could be helpful to an HS patient. We are trying to incorporate into that. So just a little background kind of on how we got started, with Healing Space and where that all originated from. And I can't wait for it to continue to grow. And I hope that, patients and physicians find it as a helpful resource to direct their patients to. So let's start by talking about what brought you into the HS space. And Cara, we'll start with you. And what have you learned from working with HS patients?
What I've learned from working with HS patients is everyone's experience with their HS and their HS symptoms seems to be very unique. But when it comes to mental health, there's so many similar themes over and over and over again that I see, with the shame and the embarrassment that HS patients perceive about themselves, because I always preach there's nothing to be ashamed or embarrassed about, but it's something that we all struggle with. And oftentimes that can be a huge barrier for us to even go and get medical care because we're too ashamed and embarrassed to even try. That is something I've heard over and over again in the community.
Yeah. And Dr. Okoye, what do you see? Do you see that resonating in your experiences with HS patients as well?
Absolutely. And Cara, I absolutely agree that the physical symptoms can differ, but you're right, the mental health struggles are the same. And I think having community just to even discuss these issues is in and of itself therapeutic. One of the other things it's really struck me is that HS affects people in the prime of their lives. It's a time in your life when you are forming relationships, you're trying to build a career, you might be in school, raising kids, and it can absolutely derail people's futures. So, we can't just treat medically. We have to treat that part of the disease as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and Kajal, as we know, there's a lot of research around mental health and HS. What does the literature tell us? Because we know what we experience as patients living with HS, but what does the literature say?
Yeah, so there's quite a bit of literature out there on HS and the impact on mental health, but research does show that the rates of depression and anxiety are noticeably higher in those with HS compared to those without HS. And depending on the study, it's been found that 17% to 27% of people with HS experience depression, and between 5 to 18% experience anxiety. These numbers just highlight how much HS can affect the emotional being of the patient as well. And it's not just the skin, right? It's beyond that.
Yeah, and I think that is interesting. And Cara, tell me if you feel the same, because sometimes I wonder if like HS patients are being and Dr. Koye, for you too, even, that we know that we have these symptoms of depression and anxiety, but I don't know that most of us have necessarily like associated those with our HS and are potentially even being treated for them. Because I think to a certain degree, part of it becomes normalized for us as that is just our life, right? And so, what is your opinion on that, Dr. Okoye?
Well, when I hear those numbers, I think, wow, we need to do more research because that is not my experience. My experience is that the vast majority of patients living with HS have either anxiety, depression, or both. So clearly, our research is not reaching everybody, and we're not asking those questions enough to get good data.
And Cara, what's your experience too with the community?
Oh, I would definitely say like even I find my experience is similar to others in which I at one point sought out mental health care because I felt like I had depression and anxiety. And then she's like, "Oh, why is that?" And then we like saw the underlying like shame that I had. And then it came out that I had HS. I didn't even lead into it with HS. For myself and a lot of people in the community, I definitely want to reaffirm that sometimes it's so normal to us living with HS, we don't even see the connection at the time.
Yeah, I think that happens for a lot of people until they start to experience community and these things are discussed like out in the open. And we talk about those experiences, and then you start to process them and realize like how many different ways your life has been impacted by your HS that you may not have even clued into until you've had like a verbal conversation with it. Because so much of our discussion about our HS, I think, is internal, and then to like actually have somebody who for the first time you don't have to over explain yourself, or who just gets it, that you're like, we call them HS besties, right? Like instantly you just are connected. So yeah, it's fascinating to kind of see the change in people when they do start to find community and feel more comfortable. It's like you can finally process some of those emotions that you've been holding on to for so long that you weren't even aware of. um so let's talk about, because we know another issue that happens with HS is the toll it takes on relationships, personal, professional, intimate relationships, partners, children, family dynamics, and all of that. So Kajal, can you tell us a little bit about what the literature says when it comes to the toll that HS takes on relationships?
Yeah, so in the literature, there's data that does show that living with HS does take a real toll on relationships. One study found that looking at nearly 900 people, 6 out of 10 patients said that HS was affecting their relationships. And then half mentioned that it impacted their intimacy, and 4 in 10 felt that they were unsure about how to talk to their partner about it. And what's also telling is that 85% were actually afraid to tell or show their partner their skin lesions because they might be afraid of what their partner may think of it, or be, what kind of thoughts it could bring to their partner if they're not fully understanding what HS is. And it really does show again that HS is just beyond the skin, right? And it's having that emotional toll, and it can impact relationships and things like that as well.
Yeah. And Dr. Okoye, do you have open conversation with your patients about this kind of a thing? And how do you bring this up? Because we know, like, as HS patients, and it's a very like sensitive topic and one that's not often discussed enough. So how do you kind of encourage those conversations?
Well, Brindley, that's a great question, and this is tough. And I try to build some relationship first, so I won't usually delve into those conversations on the first or second visit. But I get to know the patient a little bit. I see who they bring or don't bring to their visits. I ask about family and friends and kind of get a sense for what their lives are like. And then I just dive in, like, okay, so how's dating? Let's say they're 20 and they're in college. I was like, are we dating? What's happening? Give me the scoop. And I try
Yeah.
to make it really casual. And people will cry and they will, really explain how much this is getting in their way. But one thing that's really heartening for me, and I've seen it over and over again, is I offer for them to bring their partner, it's usually a new partner, to a visit, and we talk about it scientifically. I explain, and then we show the lesions. And I got 100% of the time, people are supportive. I
Mhm.
think by the time you bring a partner, you're able to bring a partner to a doctor's visit, you know they're invested. And so I've been really heartened to see that in general, people's partners are extremely supportive once they know what's going on with you, because they've probably been asking themselves, what's going on? They know you're in pain. They know you're unhappy. They know you're struggling and they don't know why. So that's been good news, I think.
It's so true. And it makes me think of, one of the things that I know I've experienced in Cara, I'm sure you have too, is that regardless of how many times your partner tells you that you're beautiful and they don't care, you can't believe that.
Right.
It's like impossible till you get to a certain point of acceptance, I think, with your disease that you can actually believe that person. Um, and have you experienced similar?
Yeah, always say, and like my philosophy behind it is you're not going to accept that someone else is accepting of your HS if you yourself aren't accepting that you have HS. If you aren't accepting that you're beautiful, there's no way you're going to accept that someone else sees you as beautiful. It's self-acceptance first, but also you don't have to be a fully healed person to heal with another person. So it can be a beautiful thing when someone else does see you as the beautiful person that you are and can help you on that journey.
Absolutely. And I think it also speaks to that when you're living with HS, you try really hard to minimize your struggles because you don't want to be a burden on someone else, right? So I think that also leads to major communication breakdown because when someone asks you, "Are you okay?" you're just like, "Yes, I'm fine." But it's short, it's direct, and then the other person can't help but think like, "Is it something I'm doing? Why are they always short with me?" when it's really like a self-preservation thing, but
Mhm.
it kind of backfires
Yeah.
because you think that you're protecting someone from the pain and the burden that you feel you are, but you're also robbing someone of the ability to be helpful, to understand, to be empathetic, and to really like show up for you. But I
Mhm.
think that for so long from feeling like a burden, you're afraid of like opening that part of you to potentially be told that you're not worth
Yes,
sticking
it's the
through this
fear
with.
of rejection, I find, because if the person isn't interested in helping you, then you're going to feel rejected. And then in your own mind, it reaffirms to you that you are the problem. But by not letting your partner know they can't help you, which reaffirms to you that you must be a burden. And it's a nasty cycle.
Mm.
Exactly. So it's like, oh, it's because we didn't work out because of my attitude. But really, the stem was my attitude because of my HS, because I wasn't willing to be open and vulnerable. And so, yeah. It's interesting when you think about it in hindsight too, and how you may have self-sabotaged in other relationships in your life without even knowing that. Kind of as you mature through like your HS journey too and understanding that.
I wouldn't even say it's necessarily full self-sabotage either, because at the time it's like a protective
Yeah.
mechanism that helped you and it was a
Mm.
necessary part of your life. But then when you realize it's no longer serving you, then that's when it was time to let it go.
Yeah. And again, I think it's conversations with other people who just get that. And sometimes it takes somebody who's gone before you on your journey to like say, oh, is this a behavior that you also do? Until
Mhm.
you're like, well, I don't want to say yes, but yes, you know, and figuring out what that looks like. So I think that's another place where community is just so important to have those conversations that are really like telling about how you can look at yourself differently and work on yourself regardless of, where you are in your journey. Um let's talk a little bit about and we kind of touched on this a little bit, but Cara, what would you say to someone who feels unlovable because of their skin?
Oh, that's such a common one too. And I think we've all been there where you feel less than, which also makes you accept less. So that's where I would definitely start when they say that they feel unlovable, is starting at what level are you like accepting into your life? Because if you have yourself so low, you'll accept not great behavior from other people. So that's instantly where I start when they say that they're unlovable, is helping build them up so that they can start experiencing love from other people so that they can also start loving themselves. And sometimes even just going straight to loving themselves is too big of a jump when you've been in such a place where you don't feel lovable. It's starting with like neutrality of just you are, and starting from there is typically what I say. I try and like talk to them about how you don't have to necessarily go straight to loving yourself, which is right over here. If you're in a place, and I've been there too, where you feel so unlovable, it's just getting to a nice neutral place and then building from there and building the supportive community that can help you.
I think that's a really, really good point because I think we're often told by like society that you have to love yourself. And there are a lot of us who just haven't been at that point or aren't ready for that jump yet. And like you said, that neutrality is so important. Can I
Yeah,
just start
well,
by liking myself a little bit? Like finding things about myself that I like and not have to be in this like, you're not worthy because you don't love yourself. It's like, it can become a really vicious cycle for people. So
and
I
a lot
love
of
that.
times that unlovable part did stem from HS. And I couldn't imagine going up to anyone with HS and being like, okay, we're going to learn to love this thing that causes you pain and shame and embarrassment. Like, you need to love that. It's so unrealistic half the time that neutral can be better. And then you can separate the HS from yourself because you are not HS. It is just a condition that you have, so that you can have some neutrality around your HS, and then maybe you can start finding some things that you do love about yourself outside of it.
Yeah. And Dr. Quay, how does that, I'm guessing that because you have conversations with your patients and you're such a lovable human being, that these kinds of things like come up as well during regular patient interactions. How do you handle that if somebody is really struggling with that, feeling lovable or ever finding like they're going to have a spouse or
Yeah.
anybody?
I struggle with this one, Brindley, because I feel like I don't give the time as much as I try. I In that setting, it's hard to give that issue the time it needs because that is so deep and so painful and so impactful. The few things that I feel like I'm able to do in a medical visit setting is I remind patients that you're not an HS patient. You are a person who has HS, which, just to give a little distance, that's similar to what Kara was saying. And, you know, you're more than your skin. And I find in general, I mean, I'm biased, but my patients with HS are my favorite patients because here they have this thing that they're dealing with day in and day out, but they are the most loving, most generous, most resilient people I know. And so I talk about those things, and that those are the things that make people lovable, not their skin. But I sometimes it feels so hollow in the setting of a 30-minute visit, and I have a luxurious 30-minute, visit. So I don't know. I try, but I don't know how much of a difference those short conversations make. But I hope they do.
I think that they do. And I think, one of the other things, and I know we've talked about this before, is making sure that your patients know that their HS isn't their fault. Like it's different from hearing that from like other people in the community, but almost that like validation from a healthcare professional is like, it's so freeing, you know? And like, I love the way that you put it that you're not your HS, you know, you are a completely separate person. This is part of your story, but it isn't you. It doesn't define you. And I think sometimes we get lost in that, right? Because for us, it does become a defining point or defining thing about us. So I think it's lovely. And I'm sure that it does make a difference for people because I think they getting that from people who you know, are outside of their community or outside of their house or their family, I think is really validating too.
Yeah.
So that's, yeah, that's, I love it. um Kajal, you work with a lot of HS specialists across the nation. How do programs like HS Connect's Healing Space make a difference in creating those supportive kind of environments for patients?
Yeah, so programs like HS Connect and the Healing Space, they're so crucial. They provide a space where people can share their experiences, their various emotions, and it doesn't matter where they're located, right? They can all come together to kind of have that judgment-free space to share their stories. And working with HS specialists, they play a large role, I think, in the critical care. And Dr. Okoye also spoke to the role that clinicians can also have about asking about the other aspects of the life of a patient with HS when it comes to mental health and family and being social and things like that. But I think a community like HS Connect and Healing Space can definitely help add to that and help fill those gaps and bring that connectivity and that sense of community. And it brings a space where patients can feel supported, feel like they're not alone, feel like they're being seen and heard, and hopefully empower them to advocate for themselves more often and build that sense of community.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I think that they're all very valid points. And Dr. Okoye, do you think that having these kinds of spaces are helpful for patients, like as a place to refer them to, you know, for things like you said, you get a luxurious 30 minutes, and we know most physicians have 7. And that it's hard to get everything done even in the 30. So we know that other physicians are also battling that time frame, you know, issue. So do you find that it's helpful for your patients to know that a place exists for them?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, you know, I'm still meeting patients who this is the first time they've even heard the words HS. And so it just helps people to not feel so alone. And I think HS is kind of uniquely, um, it's a unique challenge in that patients can be walking around looking like nothing's going on, but they're in excruciating pain. And that makes people feel very lonely. No one knows what
Mm.
I'm going through. Yet I'm showing up here every day. I have like a police officer who's a patient, and she said one of her colleagues said, "Man, you bend over like an old lady." She's like, "They have no idea why I do that." You know, it's just so isolating. So yes, I think having spaces where people get it really helps, and I think patients get they get good advice, they get good medical advice, they get informed advice from people who've been through it.
Yeah, and it's something that having another HS person is so validating.
Mhm.
And especially like being able to share, like when you said bend over like an old person, instantly I was like, oh, we know. Yeah. You know, and like I think to myself even further about being a police officer and having to wear like body armor,
Yep.
and like instantly
Mm.
I think, oh my God, that must be so uncomfortable. I don't know how they do it every single day and still show up. And
Mhm.
then for us on the mental health piece, you kind of, it's just what you do. You don't know how to, you can't not do that, you know? And I know that that becomes a struggle, and we talk a lot often about how we just move through things because there is no time to process them. That
Mhm.
is your daily, you just have to keep going. And when you do actually stop and have time to process things, you don't realize how many things there are to process
Mm.
that you have just muscled through. And
Mhm.
Cara, do you have that same experience or?
Oh, most definitely. It's for a lot of us too, it starts in early puberty. So it really becomes, it's part of all of your memories. So the time in which you're not dealing with these things for some of us isn't even in here. So it's completely normal. So then you become an adult and someone talks about how you bend over funny to pick something up, or how you sit funny, or like for me personally, how I will not sit on chairs that aren't cushioned. You almost forget sometimes it's not what everyone else is doing. It just becomes such an ingrained part of you that when you do look back and realize all of it, it can be very overwhelming.
Yeah. And even to that point, we've been talking a lot lately about things that we've missed in life. Sleepovers when you're younger, going to the pool, like if somebody has a pool party, you're going to the beach, all of these like coming of age things. Prom, it was a nightmare finding a dress that had sleeves, and like all of these things that are a part of you and growing up and a part of your story, but that you in some ways like your HS robbed you of those life experiences because you couldn't be normal like
Yeah,
anyone else.
remember last year in Austin at the Empower event was the first time I had a sleepover with a bunch of girls. First time ever. The first time I wore a fancy dress and wasn't worried about my scars showing. And it was the first time I had a giant pool party with a bunch of friends, all in one weekend with the HS community. It was the good type of overwhelming.
Love that.
Yeah. It's crazy how you don't realize all of these things until you like really start to process and look back. And like I've had HS for 36 years and I'm still working through those things. So I think it's kind of it's a never-ending thing that happens. Okay, let's talk about accessing mental health support because I think this is obviously another issue that we typically have in the community. And even just we know that in general, like the general population, even outside of HS patients. So, Cara, you've been a strong advocate for mental health in the HS community. From your perspective, what are the biggest barriers that people with HS face when trying to get mental health support?
Ooh, the biggest barriers I often see is financial. I think a lot of people in the HS world would like to access more mental health care, but they're unable to. The one right underneath that is not even thinking about accessing mental health care because they see it as a skin disease and aren't understanding how heavy of a burden it is mentally. And then they just blame themselves for not being able to handle it. And then also the isolation of wondering if they can even find a therapist that's going to be able to understand what they're going through tend to be the biggest barriers, which is why I love the healing space so much because it's really trying to bring in specifically things we struggle with HS and then tools on how to work through them, which might even just show patients that yes, you can access mental health resources and they are something that will be able to help you because sometimes it's not even something we think about because we just think it's a skin disease.
Yeah, and they're free and you can do it at your own pace and no one has to know you're doing it if you don't want them to. And yeah,
And then all of the support groups as well that HS Connect runs, like the Brotherhood and all of those, they're so helpful.
yeah. Dr. Okoye, where do you think the healthcare system falls short in supporting patients with HS mentally, especially for communities like Black, Indigenous, people of color, men, low income? I mean,
Yeah.
where do you think that we're falling down?
We're falling down everywhere. I think our health system in general really doesn't prioritize mental health. And you could see that just in terms of insurance coverage. So if a patient has insurance, there's a good chance their insurance does not include mental health, or it includes only paying a portion of whatever the copay is. There are mental health providers, because of the low insurance coverage, who've decided to go completely out of network. And so patients have told me they pay $150 to $350 per session. Most of my patients cannot afford that. And then, I found some free resources in my city, but then the wait time is 9 months or a year, and you've got 30 minutes. And, it's just, I just feel like we need to do better. I think we need more advocacy because it has to come all the way from the top.
Yeah. And I think, to that point, even, and Cara, I was thinking about this when you were talking about it, we don't even have mental health therapists that are trained on chronic disease that are available or that know what HS is or what HS patients face when they're living their day-to-day life. So it also kind of creates a little bit of a conundrum when the patient becomes the educator of the mental health, therapist in telling them how their HS affects them. It kind of changes that dynamic. And it also, as a person living with HS, you're not even honest with yourself about all the ways because you don't know all of the ways that it is actually impacting you. So I find that to be interesting too, and it's something that we're working on at HS Connect and with Healing Space is trying to make sure that there are mental health therapists that are educated so that they can speak and help, patients like ours. And I think this goes across all skin too, because we know that a lot of those of us who struggle with mental health with HS, that everybody who deals with skin condition has so many of the same mental health issues in dealing with theirs. So it's basically it's an entire skin thing that we need to like educate people across the board on skin conditions so that they can then, help us move through.
Yeah, I find a large part of it's just chronic health in general because it affects our skin, but it also affects joints and memory and so many other ways that like finding a therapist that specializes in chronic health can be one of the most important things because chronic health also has that interesting side of it as well. Typically, when you go in to see a dermatologist, you expect them to like hand you a cream and then you're like, okay, take this and then you'll be all better. So it can be shocking to your system too when they're like, no, this is chronic and here's a cream, but it's not necessarily going to go away. I find someone that specializes just in chronic health in general can be so helpful.
Oh, and
Yeah.
Brindley, I'm sorry, I didn't answer the second part of your question, if I may. So you mentioned, BIPOC patients, lower income patients, and men. I think another barrier there is in some communities, there's a stigma around mental health concerns, seeking help for mental health concerns, and so I think that can get in the way as well. And something else that's come up with my patients, if they see, let's say, a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist recommends medications, I find patients to be sometimes resistant to that. They feel like they're already on so many medications. I'm 21 years old. I'm on, two antibiotics and a biologic, and I don't know that I want to take something else. I feel like that becomes another barrier sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I can see that for sure. And that is one of the reasons why we're also trying to create these safe spaces for, special populations like men to say, you guys, we see you and we know that you struggle in a different way than women do. And so let's create a safe space for you. And then by just raising awareness of HS and encouraging patients to come and talk about those experiences, and hopefully, our goal is to normalize HS. Really, it just becomes something like diabetes that people talk about and there's no judgment attached to it, or, high blood pressure, and you're like, oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. So that we don't have to carry that shame and that burden that we have for so long, and that these things become normalized as well in finding that support. So it's a really good point. Um, Cara, we know HS can be overwhelming. So what coping tools do you think have helped patients the most?
Acceptance. That's a very quick one, is accepting that you do have HS. Because I find a lot of the times we just fight against it so much, in which it's, how do I make this go away? Or all of the negative feelings that come with it is just accepting that you have HS and it's okay, that it's not your fault, that you're not dirty. It's almost like sometimes we think if we just clean more, it could go away, or if we just eat these perfect curated diets that we'll be cured. It's just accepting that there is things that we can do that can help it, but accepting that it is something that we're going to have to live with, and that doesn't make us less of a person.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Okoye, same thing. Like, what are some of your go-to strategies that you use when you have patients that come in that are having hard days or are really at a point of struggle?
hmm I think for hard days, I think many patients, if we spend enough time together, I realize that they know what to do to cope. Like they've kind of figured it out already, and they just needed maybe a little permission to do that thing because maybe it feels selfish to them, right? Maybe it feels selfish to say, okay, I'm feeling like a flare coming on. I'm going to lay down today. And I'm just going to lay here and rest and take care of myself and hydrate and take my medication and get better quicker. So I think people often know, but if they don't, I try to give really concrete suggestions for people to try and see which one resonates with them. I find a really important time is the time between when you take your medication and when you get relief. And that may be 30 minutes, it may be an hour, it may be two, if you're lucky and your medication's working. Um, so that time period, what are you going to do to like manage? And that could be music, it could be a bath, and a hot bath can help not just with the mental health part, but it can actually help with the HS training and so on. It could be prayer, it could be meditation, so I just kind of give people like very specific things to try to see which one will stick.
Yeah, very, very good feedback, because I think sometimes you get lost too and overwhelmed. And even though you may know what to do, you kind of just like you get to an impasse where you're just like, I don't know anymore. And so having somebody even just tell you like the simple things, I think is a really good reminder for that. All right, so let's talk about self-advocacy and empowerment. Dr. Okoye, what advice do you have for patients who feel like they could be dismissed or misunderstood in medical settings? What would you tell patients to, how would you tell them to address those things if they're being experienced?
I would say keep looking for providers that meet your needs. I don't think an individual patient can change someone's bedside manner or their interest or desire to take care of patients with HS because I think everybody does not want to do that. And I think everybody probably isn't equipped to do it. And so I think it's okay to just honestly shop around until you find your team. You might have to
Yeah.
travel. You might have to drive a couple hours, but
Yes, exactly. And we always say like sometimes you have to kiss frogs before you find your prince,
yeah.
right? And it kind of is the same thing when it comes to physicians. And not everyone clicks. It's just like in regular life, just not everyone clicks, and totally agree. We're a unique and special patient population. I think we want people who are invested in taking care of us and who get just as much joy out of our journey as we do going on that journey, and to having better treatment options and all of that. And so we aren't meant for all providers, and not all providers are HS experts. And it's important to recognize that. And if you don't feel like you're being heard or validated, then it is okay to shop around for new providers. Because there are plenty of really, really great providers. And sometimes that even becomes look for online providers who specialize too, especially if you're in rural areas, because that's also a really difficult place to get, really good care. So, you're right. Just shop around.
Yeah.
Cara, do you have any advice for patients who feel dismissed or misunderstood from a patient advocate point of view?
Yes, I always say to not take it personally. I think because sometimes we do have lower self-esteem when a person of authority, which is a doctor, looks at you and also goes, I'm dismissing you. It can reaffirm to you that you aren't important, and like reaffirm that internal belief you already have that maybe you aren't worthy of getting medication, or maybe you aren't worthy of even getting better, because those thoughts can start circulating. Just because they're a doctor, just because they're a care provider, doesn't mean they have the authority over you for you to feel less than because they can't give you what you need. And you have the power, like we just said, to shop around, to find the person that will, and happily and with excitement, get you the treatments you need. It has nothing to do with yourself, like your worth as a human being. If a provider can't get you what you need, it's not the right fit.
Yeah, perfect. So Kajal, let's talk about like what is one way that someone can start taking ownership over their care. And especially I think this comes into play when it comes into step therapy and things like this. What do you recommend for a patient on how to move forward through that?
So from a medical advocacy perspective, just documenting everything, because there's a lot that might happen in between your clinic visits. And I think it'd be very hard to remember everything. So if you along the way can document when you have flares, how long they lasted in different details, that could be helpful in a clinic visit. Additionally, there's also an app called Papaya that also allows patients to track their journey as well, so that they can have a single spot where they're putting all their signs and symptoms and flares in between visits. And then also, once again, reaching out to their networks, their community, people within HS Connect to kind of gain other tools that they can utilize to help advocate for themselves in those clinic visits, and just them knowing that they're not being difficult when they're proposing that data and that information to their clinician. It could also be very helpful for the clinician to know and see what's been happening in between the visits. So it allows them to become a really good advocate for themselves.
And Dr. Okoye, do you find that that's helpful when somebody is using like the Papaya app and has all of that information just ready to go,
Yeah.
between the visits when they come in the next time?
Yeah, you know how else it's really helpful is it's really great to see, let's say you've had 5 flares in 3 months last time, and then we started a new therapy, and then when you come back, you had 1 flare in 3 months. Then we're able to compare how you're doing when we change therapy. So I think record keeping is great. I think for some patients, keeping records is cathartic, but for some patients, keeping records is stressful and makes them kind of think more about the HS than they want to. So, I think you have to decide which side of that fence you fall on. And then I think it's good for patients, especially who have had a long journey with HS, to keep track of the medications they've used, for how long, and what the results were, whether they had any side effects, because then, boy, it's super easy for me to say, well, insurance company, we have tried X, Y, and Z, so we need this new medication or whatever is on the market.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, I think, with the our recall bias, right? That it's mainly like 7 days. And so I've been battling with my 18-year-old over this too, being on different treatments of keeping track of how many flares she's having, because you start to say, well, it isn't working, but is it working? Just you only remember the last 7 days instead of what it was like, 4 months ago. And so I think that that's really difficult too. And I think that sometimes it does really help to show us the progress that we've made. But that becomes your new normal. And then you're consistently chasing after, the waiting for the endpoint. So I do think that that is really interesting. And I agree, like, getting an 18-year-old to like keep track of things, even if it's on an app, is difficult. And I would probably struggle with it myself. But I think that they have worked really hard, and like we helped with developing Papaya to try and make it as easy as possible for patients to use. But regardless, it is something you have to do and check in every day, and it does bring your HS to the forefront. But like you said, for some people, it is cathartic to be like, oh, look at the progress I'm making, because I think we do lose sight of that, because it's still present in our lives, but maybe it's not as bad as it was or as frequent as it was. But we forget what that point that we started from looks like sometimes.
Yeah.
So it's a good perspective.
Brindley, one more thing, I have a few patients who are like super like planner people. So planners have they have all these resources where they have either a digital PDF, and it's an HS symptom tracker, or one on paper, and they track not just their symptoms, but like fatigue, and they track their medications. Did I take my dose today? Did I need a rescue medicine? That stuff is super helpful, but they kind of have to be into planning. So yeah, it might be a fun resource for HS Connect to help the planners out.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll look into that in 2029. No, just kidding.
Add to your to-do list.
Okay, thank you guys so much. I really, really appreciate this discussion today, and like hearing from everybody, bringing the science, bringing the experience in the HS clinic, the patient advocacy, the mental health all together. Thank you again to UCB for supporting this program. healing space is such an important place for HS patients to have, and for physicians to also have available to send their HS patients to. As we could tell by the, the science and literature, we know it's a huge unmet need, and we're working as hard as we can to help fill that. And having, partners who see the value in that is so incredibly helpful to the HS community and to the providers. So we have a lot of resources, like we had talked about, available for HS patients on HS Connect. We have healing space, of course. We have support groups, a special men's group called the Brotherhood. We have a motherhood group, parent group, a teen group. We just started a Spanish group. We're looking to start a Down syndrome parent support group, because we know that there are so many unmet needs that we can help fill the niche with the special patient populations. And then just a plethora of information available on our site as well. So again, thank you guys for being here. Thank you for sharing your experiences. Thank you for caring so much for patients with HS, Dr. Okoye. Kajal, thank you for bringing all of the science piece to us, because I think it's important to know that we do have some validation through those measures as well. And then Cara, thank you for all your words of advice as an HS patient and mental health advocate. So we will see you on the next one. Thanks, guys.